Hi, I'm going to close the door because it seems to be a big construction and traffic day. There we go, that's better. Well, welcome. This is Writing Wednesday, where I answer your. I'm Janet Fitch, and this is Writing Wednesday, where I answer your writing questions, craft questions, psychological questions, philosophical questions, existential questions, whatever it is that you want to talk about, because writing is writing. It's all you. It's all your body, your soul, your attention, your intelligence. Hi, Wendy. Hi, Amy. Good to see you. Um, so it's all grist to the mill. And if you have questions for me today, put them in the chat and I will be happy to answer them. And if you have questions for me in between Writing Wednesdays, send them to me through my website, janetfitchwrites.com, and I can create a Writing Wednesday around your question. Welcome. And I just want to warn you that we have utility guys working in the street in front of the house. So if you're jackhammering, life life goes on. We write in the real world, and there's jackhammering and garbage trucks and people, cats meowing and all kinds of stuff. So life. um, so what I thought I would write about, what I would talk about today. Hi, Marie. I have been working on, as you maybe some of you know, I've been working on edits of a book, and I have been um, working on adding a character. And at this late date, I've been working on that book since the pandemic. So adding a character now has, at first I balked. It's like, I, I just wanted to shorten it. I didn't want to add a character. But I saw the sense of it, and I'm giving it a try. And it brought up the question of sequential writing versus writing out of sequence. And one of the interesting things about editing is that you're still free, you're still creating the work. People think that editing is just copy editing, it's just getting in and polishing the sentences and, maybe cutting a few things here and there. But writing remains a creative act all the way until it's between hardcovers. It remains a creative act, and being thrown a curveball, like adding a character, point of view character, at first was kind of dismaying. It's like, really? How can I do that? It's set up in my mind. Once you've got it set up in your mind, you've been working on it for a long time. Where is the flexibility? How can you go in and break it open again? I've said everything I need to say. Now I'm just moving furniture. No, it remains a creative act until you are done, until you hand it in, until the editing process is done and it goes into copy editing, and that's a whole micro world of copy editing, where they notice that one character drives a gold Lincoln, 65 Lincoln, and then 300 pages later, a different character is driving the 65 Lincoln. Hi, Sarah. So it's copy editing is that's the end product. But when you're still in flux, when you're still in the editing phase, and you get something like, consider adding a character, consider this, consider that, you're back in creative space, and you're it reminds me that um, there are other ways to create than chronological order. Um, when I was writing my first book, my first, when I was writing White Oleander, there's first books and first books. Hi, Jill. Um, I did not have an order. I did not know what was going to happen. I did not know any sequencing of events. So what I did was I wrote anything I could see clearly. I wrote that scene or a chapter, whatever, usually a scene, and I threw it in a box. And then I wrote another scene, anything I could see from anywhere in the book, and threw it in a box. And after the box was full, I got a 3-ring binder. I love my 3-ring binders. There's some behind me right now. Whoop, this way. There. um, I love a 3-ring binder. So I took all those scenes out of the box, and I had them 3-hole punch, or I did it, and put them in the binder and saw if I could get a flow to these sections, and one by one they went in the binder, and things like some of the first scenes that I had written past what had been a short story, which was the first 3 chapters of the book. I didn't know what order they would come in. And so I just I remember the first scene that I really saw clearly in White Oleander after the opening of the book, the first 3 chapters, was my character dyeing her foster mother's hair in a bathroom. And I saw it very clearly. If you ever dyed somebody's hair, I used to dye my mother's hair or help her dye her hair in the bathroom. And it's very, very intimate. You're in there with the door closed, and it smells terrible, and they're, only partially dressed. Hi, Pat. They're partially dressed, and it's very intimate. And I wrote that scene, threw it in the box. Did not know where in the book it would come. And just scenes would come to me, and I'd write them and put them in the box. And then I sat with my 3-hole, putting the various scenes in the notebook. Does it go, does this group of scenes, this character, this home, hi, Swad, this group of scenes, do they come, which would come first, you know? And then I could see also, as I started arranging the scenes, I could see what needed to come, that maybe there was a scene that I was going to need rhythmically, emotionally, something here. And I just put a page in there going TK, Toucan in journalese. So something here. And then ordering scenes so that it just made more sense, that scene with I found out, of course, who that character was, whose hair she was dyeing, and that would not come close in. I needed a sort of a place to land when my character, um, when my character's mother went to prison. Where does she land? And I had more of a feeling that she would land in a home with other children and trying to get used to the idea of being a foster kid, and progressing. Oh, okay, this home has, this is like her hope. this bright star, this one beautiful place. Um, I don't want that too close to the beginning. I want her to earn that. And then when that falls apart, what happens? So working non-sequentially. And I'm finding myself doing this again with the character, the scenes with this new character that I'm adding to the book, and not, you know, I don't know where any of this stuff goes. I'm just seeing this new character. I'm seeing her where she is. I have narratives, I have narrative of, who am I? When I was 16, blah, blah, blah. When I was 3, blah, blah, blah. So history, which is not necessarily going to be in the book at all, because I usually start the character with where they're at and then piecing in the backstory if as needed. So I've got to see what will go with the rest of the book. So I'm just writing material now. I'm writing scenes, scenelets, little paragraphs. And when I have enough that I feel there's enough there, I will, I probably am going to be adding maybe 75 pages of this other character. And once I got enough, once I feel like, there's enough, at least nubs of scenes, if not completed scenes, then I'll go have the manuscript in a ring binder, the trimmed manuscript that I've ripped out 4 characters already. Put that in a ring binder, and then as I go along, where would this character's scenes be? And space them so there's some kind of rhythm. You're always looking for a rhythm of character voices. This was a 2-person points of view, and now there's 3 points of view. So we want to have a rhythm so that the reader comes to expect, oh, here's this character again, rather than like, what? Who is that? Why is that? If I know that every roughly 30, 50 pages, there's going to be one of this character coming in again. So I can set up a regular insertion of these scenes so that the reader comes to expect it and is not jarred by the insertion. It's a really effective way to work if you are you feel overwhelmed, you have a tendency to write scenes that just kind of mill around because you feel like you have to connect this scene with this scene with this scene. So it's like, let's find some kind of a transitional scene that nobody cares about, that doesn't, doesn't move anything. It doesn't do anything for a reader, but you as the writer feel that you have to go from A to B to C. And remember that you don't have to go from A to B to C. You can go from A to D to, H to, and then maybe back to B if you want to. It makes it much more interesting for the reader. We're used to cuts. We're used to big cuts. We watch movies. We're really familiar with a cut, and we're not lost. If you feel you're going to lose your reader, they're going to be too confused, you can put little signposts, getting, just mentioning what came before if you want to, just to, keep, but only where you think the reader is going to be really confused. It doesn't hurt for the reader to be slightly confused. Even if you're working in a workshop and your workshop mates ask you questions, don't feel just because a reader has a question that it has to be answered. It's just, that at this point, the reader's going, oh my God, who's Marjorie? Um, you don't have to tell them who's Marjorie. It's good to know that the reader wants to know, and you're going to pay that off at some point. But you can have them in suspense. You can have them questioning. If you answer every question that a reader has, it's not going to be interesting. It's like I've used this metaphor before, so forgive me, but it's like being on a plane where somebody tells you about their divorce. And at first, you're interested. I'm nosy, I want to hear about your divorce briefly. But when it becomes clear that they're digging in and they're going to tell you the entire story, they're telling you more than you want to know. It's better to tell the reader slightly less than they want to know. Um, and then they lean forward, then they're watching, then they're alert and they're awake, and they're looking, so just because people have questions doesn't mean you have to answer them. You just have to know that there's a question there. And working non-sequentially. You can also write non-sequentially and order, chronologically later if you want to. But there's also narratives where you move back and forth in time, where they don't move forward sequentially. And some of the most interesting books are written that way. If you think about, say, The Lover by Marguerite Duras, it goes backwards and forwards. It goes to her childhood, the character's childhood in Vietnam, before it was Vietnam, French Indochina, um, and what was going on there. And then it comes forward to her present life, and then it goes backwards, back and forth. And she distinguishes the timelines by the past timeline is written in present tense. Is that it? And the past timeline is written, the past timeline is written in present tense, and the present timeline is written in past tense. It's very interesting. Let's see if I have The Lover at hand and I can show you. No, it doesn't pop off the shelf, so we'll have to try that another time. But think about books that you've read that move around in time. And when you're writing, you do not have to connect the dots. You can have dots and float them. You can figure out, how you like to juxtapose scenes, or put stuff out. You can put stuff out of order. You can write it out of order and then present it as chronology. So there's a lot of different ways to do this. Now we've talked about, okay, Sarah says, I'd love for you to explain at some point how you'd approach putting in a reveal at the end and sowing scenes for it throughout, and how you feel about reveals in general. Same as plot twist, unsure. Okay, reveals. There's always going to be reveals, which is just people are going to learn something that pulls a lot of seemingly unrelated material together. Click. So you have to prepare for a reveal. You have to both prepare and misdirect. You're the magician, right? I have a reveal. Each subplot, each strand in this book has at least one, if not more, reveals. And the two most important things are You prepare for it. You prepare the reader psychologically for something that explains something you've set up. So if you have a character who flinches every time the door slams, then you reveal that there was a door slam and they got locked in and there was a fire and they, you know, barely escaped. So that it's like, oh, the reveal is this is why they're like that. Um, I don't put the reveal at the end because a reveal has to be incorporated into the rest of the book. There's uh, when you learn, oh my God, my mother is my sister is actually my mother. Say, it's revealed to you that your sister, your older sister, is actually your mother, and your mother is actually your grandmother. Okay, here's a good reveal. Say it's somebody knows that in the family and was supposed to shut up about it, and blow, like their kid decides to spill the beans at a family dinner or something like that. The world opens up. Oh my God, oh my God. And then what happens as a result? You have to let the character assimilate this information, and we have to see it's almost like a pachinko, if anybody's seen a pachinko machine, and you see the marbles go down through the maze of pins. So a reveal has to land, has to, and sometimes it's a reveal to the reader, but it's something that the characters know, but the reader didn't know. So you prepare for it, and then you see how it settles. So it's very important to follow that up. Um, I think that it in a movie sometimes it's close to the end just because a movie is 90 minutes. They don't have that much time to absorb. In Chinatown, for instance, my mother, my sister, my mother, my sister, my daughter, my sister, my daughter, my sister, both. She's both. It's an incestuous family. Get it? You know, it's worse than you can possibly imagine or you have imagined. And then this is Chinatown, and Jake is like, oh, this is deeper water than he ever imagined. And then you have, eventually, you have the outcome, and he realized just how bad the antagonist is. Like, he didn't really realize how bad. There's financial problems, and then there's also, a really, really hideous character. So you have to let them land. I wouldn't put it right at the end, but you'd sow seeds for it. But you have to be careful. If you have a reveal that, say so and so is both my mother and my daughter, or both my mother and my sister, you don't want to have the reader guess before the reveal. So maybe you'd want to have more of the sisterly aspect of the mother. That's a setup. It's not a seed exactly. It's setting it up so that the reader is going to be genuinely surprised instead of, oh yeah, I saw that coming. You want them to know that there's something going on in this family. But if they guess it, then where's the surprise? Where's the reveal? It's not a reveal. I think that plot twists are can be reveals, they spin the plot in a different direction. So, in what way is the reveal that your mother is really your grandmother and your sister? How angry are you? What do you do after that? You know, the plot, a twist would be something is revealed like that, and then you do something that you would never have done before. It's it's similar. It can be similar plot twist. Often it's something the reader didn't guess, didn't see coming. You know, that the murdered woman is still alive. We see her, you know, getting on a bus. It's like that's a plot twist. Changes the trajectory of the plot. Um, so similar, but it's particularly characterological. The reveal is not every plot twist is a reveal, but every reveal is a plot twist. Let's put it that way. And having him at the end is not as interesting as having it more like a major reveal would be a climax, you know, so you'd want it maybe 3/4 of the way through rather than at the end. So Marie says, I feel like every time I wrote out of sequence, I'd have to play catch up with transition scenes. I never thought of writing almost no transition, but now that you mention it, my story would make sense with no transition due to the plot. Yeah, don't feel, you know, if you feel that there needs to be this what do they call the obligatory scene? Um, Usually that's a term from playwriting, from screenwriting, the obligatory scene. You do not need to write the obligatory scene. You know, you can write a surprising scene. You can jump from one thing to the next. Like, for instance, um, I um, have a scene where a character is given some news and somebody is like asking her to do something, like just saying, you have to do this. And the character's immediate reaction is, no, I don't have to do shit. I don't know you. I don't care about you. And I don't have to do shit. And you can have them go, no, no, no. And the next scene, you have them doing it. That you didn't have to have the big decision-making scene at all. And the reader will accept that because they've seen a lot of movies and they've seen these really good cuts, and you go from one thing right to the other. Um, let's see. Marie says, yeah, no transition due to the plot. Wendy says, didn't remember that about the lover, the way it is told. It's not told in order. And Sarah says, likes the pachinko analogy. Oh, very good. Hi, Llewellyn. Good to see you. Um, he was writing and got carried away. I do it all the time. I, I set an alarm on I have to set alarms on my phone. Otherwise, I just, if I have an extra 15, 20 minutes, I'll sit down to work a little bit more and then I'll look up and I've missed my appointment. Always happens. So I understand that very well. So we're talking about writing out of sequence. I'm a, especially in a first draft, but also when you're editing stuff and having to create new material on a work that's already, you know, fairly well 90% written, um, you're always writing first drafts of parts of a novel, even if it's a late stage edit. Um, there's always first stage stuff, and it does not have to be written in order. I can't tell you what a relief it was for me to write um, in non-sequential scenes. Just whatever you can see clearly, write that, rather than what I have to write. I have to fill this in. I have to fill that in. You know, if you have to do it eventually, then you will, but trust yourself, But in creating new work, in creating new material, new scenes or whatever, don't worry how they're connected. Um, if you're writing a first draft of a book, you don't worry about how you get there or how you get out of there. You know, you might find you don't need to write that at all. Um, but it's also it's related to the entrances and exits problems that I talk about in some of these other videos. The people always start a scene with getting, not always, but um, you know, uh, emerging writers often write, they spend a tremendous amount of time getting into a scene and a tremendous amount of time getting out of the scene. So much so that there's no time left for the scene itself. And, it's part of writing is learning to start the scene where something is happening or about to happen. Um, where the change is going to come, where the conflict comes in. And then once you've done your work, once the conflict has happened, we see the outcome, you're done. You don't have to pick up your books and go out and drive away. You don't have to enter and have all that, hello, how are you kind of stuff either. A little bit of narrative goes a long way and gets you right into the scene. Now, what's interesting about what I'm working on now, maybe we should just be called entering writers. We're all entering writers. What I'm working on now also is having gone from a two-person kind of a duet to a three-person braided story. Now I get to use the braid, which is a really uh, writer friendly form. You could move from story to story or voice to voice. As you run out of what you wanted to say in this voice, you skip over into that voice. And in ordering the scenes, you don't have to connect your chronology. You're not even tempted to connect your chronologies because you're going to leave that character altogether. So you don't have to worry about it. Do they go to church or not go to church? If you don't need them to go to church, skip it and let the reader figure out whatever they do on Sunday. um, what else? I'm trying to can you guys think of books that you have enjoyed that break chronology? Many times they just put a date on it, and it's 1853 and it's 1950 and it's 1893 and it's 1967, and you start to see how the stories interrelate. It becomes a judgment of what you want to layer. So your reader is taking in one layer of the story. What do you want on top of that? And now you have a blend. They have these two. are interacting in your reader's mind, and then you lay on another one. What do you want to layer in there? Or you can think of it as, I often think of it as a ride, like a Disneyland ride. The doors bang open, and what's next? Marie says Slaughterhouse-Five is the first one that comes to mind. Yeah, that's a fantastic kind of lost in time narrative. That is a really good example. And someone asked me that her teenage boy is starting to read. It's very exciting in their house. People are trying not to let him know that this is like a really exciting thing. And she was asking, what should people, what should I, make available to him without overwhelming him or giving him Moby Dick or something that he's never going to read and be turned off by. And many people said Slaughterhouse-Five would be a great next book for him. Yeah. Um, books about, trying to think of books that play with time that way. There's a wonderful book called The Travelers by Regina Porter that does a lot of moving around in time and is very carefully labels the time period so that we don't lose track. It even has like a little band at the bottom, with the various time frames that it deals with, and it enlarges the one that you're reading. So she that's a good book, and it really keeps track of the time, the various times. Sarah says, I read one recently with two timelines, same protagonist, a childhood point of view that was third person past tense, and the adult self was first person present tense. Oh, that's interesting, especially in that they were the same person. What book was that? Do you remember the title? I'd be interested in that. Some come in and out of imaginary spaces and into actual spaces, like Lincoln in the Bardo, the George Saunders book. That was interesting. What else has interesting timelines? Usually historical doesn't mess them up too much, except for Slaughterhouse-Five, obviously, a great counterexample. But a lot of literary fiction that's going to be the character going down into their own memories will move time around in an interesting way. They tend to be centered on an event and then go down into the character and move around. So these are books that are, there's a centrality to them. They don't progress like this. They spiral around. Orphan Number 8 by Kim Van Alchemade. That's interesting. This is how you lose the time war, Marie said. That sounded really interesting. I'm going to write these down because this definitely is a subject that interests me. Orphan Number 8, time. And this is how you lose the time war. And then, Virginia Woolf moves around in time quite a bit. The Hours by Michael Connelly, because it has three separate timelines. So Wendy says, do you think the braided story can work in a novella? I think too many characters for the form, but maybe braiding could keep it from growing into a full-blown novel. I don't think you have the space for it, the braided story, in a novella. It's more 3 novellas would be a braided story, could be a braided story. But you have a book like The Sound and the Fury, which is not braided. It has 4 distinct voices that never braid. They just go 1, 2, 3, 4. But the characters are all the same. And there's one that goes way back in time. But the echo, echo, echo back and forth through the stories is really interesting. The 4 stories. If you have, yeah, Travelers is great. I'm glad, Wendy. I'm glad you liked it. The echoes in Faulkner in that book, the time, Sound and the Fury, pretty amazing. What other? I'm trying to think of stories that go back and forth in time. I mean, usually these stories where there's what was going on in the past and what's going on in the present, and they braid together. I have a student who wrote a book called The Shadows of Pecan Hollow. That's a braiding past and present stories together. And then a story like Tinkers by Paul Harding, and he won the Pulitzer, I think, for the book. It's very small, and it's somebody who is in dementia and moves back and forth in time. There's a book by Kate Braverman, who was my mentor, wrote a book called The Incantation of Frida Kay. And these books start at the end of somebody's life. So somebody's dying. I love books like that. And then they are going back through their life. And Frida Kay is a wonderful book. The Incantation of Frida Kay is very beautiful. Ada by Carol Mazo is more of an experimental novel, but it's somebody who is, that's an interesting book. Let me grab it. I think Carol Mazo is an experimental writer, but she writes in like single sentences like this. And it's very poetic. So you put the associations together in your mind. So one line might be from her teenage years, and then the next line will be about her early marriage, and you come to recognize the different characters and the refrains of the different parts, so you can identify what you're reading, which story you're reading. There are people like 3 husbands. We are making our way to the Midi. We don't even remember. I don't even remember who the we is. Café du Midi, in the middle of the day. Tell him you saw us. So who's speaking? We would know by now who was speaking. We walked on enchanted land together. Carlos doing an improvised flamenco. Offhand, overheard, remembered things, imaginary things. What the story was, if not the real story, well then, what the story was for me. Rain and Laventura in the gray afternoon. You are beautiful. So these are interlinked, timelines dipped into in a person who's got cancer and is lying in a bed thinking about the various parts of her life and giving certain phrases that indicate this part of her life. The Café du Midi will probably come up again and again. And then we know it's these people this time in her life. It's a really interesting book. Who else does that? Moves around like that. Well, Joyce moves around in time all the time. I mean, all his characters, because they're very internal and they're remembering things all the time. Whereas the present action is one day, right? Ulysses is a single day. But within each character is a world. And the person can go into memory, and the person can be in the present with the people around them, and then go back and remember when that person screwed them, years ago. And then we're back in the present, and then we can be back in their childhood. And people are very rich and layered. But that kind of broken timeline doesn't work well in a thriller. You got to go. The more plot oriented the story is, um, probably the less you can break the sequence. But you can break the sequences if you do it if you do it in a regular rhythm, so the reader is prepared that you're going to be bouncing around in time. And it's like, okay, I'm ready for that. Whereas if it happens infrequently or irregularly, it jars the reader, and it's like, what's going on? I forgot. Who's Carlos? Yeah. So what else? Yeah. So we talked about transition scenes, and see if you can avoid them. See if you can just trust the reader that they can jump from one thing to another and figure out that stuff happened. But on the other hand, I remember having a chat with someone who had read um, Underground Railway, the Underground Railroad, the Colson Whitehead book. And there's also something about not completing a scene, getting up to the point of conflict, getting up to the point of really having to roll up your sleeves and get into the scene and do the dirty work. And he'll jump over that. And at some point, that is authorial cowardice. So you have to decide, do you want to, you get a phone call saying you have to do this, and your character says, no, 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 no. And then the next chapter, they're doing it. And then you have to say, am I jumping over that because I think it's more interesting to get to that next scene? And the reader will will get it that you say, no, 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 and then you do it anyway. Or am I chickening out of writing that scene where the character has to decide? You don't want too many of those milling around, having to make a decision scenes are kind of boring. So use them only if you need them. Oh, Amy says Evening by Susan Minot. I love that book. And that's another person dying, right? Thinking about their life. So those books tend to a more drifty time sense. And I just love them. I love those books because it shows the totality of somebody's experience. Really good. So, any other books or any other questions on the subject of non-sequential writing? It to me, The Parable of the Talents by Octavia Butler, Marie says, which to my shame, I have not read yet. Yeah, the movement around in time is so interesting. And it means when you're writing it, you don't have to go, oh, and then what happens? And then what happens? Oh, the obligatory scene. Oh, and then I have to get her from A to B. And how does that happen? Don't worry about it. Just write the scene and worry about it later to see whether that jump needs to be explained or whether maybe it doesn't. So anyway, I want to thank you for joining me for Writing Wednesday. And please send me questions in between times. I'm happy to make a Writing Wednesday around your question at janetfitchwrites.com. And I wish you good reading, good writing, and write non-sequentially. Just write what you see, what you can picture really clearly, write it, and worry about how it fits in later. All righty. Thank you. Okay, bye.